Hi, everyone, and welcome to AWS Nordics Office Hours with me, Gunnar Grosch, developer advocate here at Amazon Web Services. And this is my weekly show where I bring on AWS experts to talk about specific AWS topics. So you, our viewers, are able to learn something new, hopefully, ask questions, make comments, and, well, hopefully by the end of the hour, all of us have learned a lot of new things. And every week, of course, we have a specific topic to talk about with our guest. And this week, I am joined by my team member, Wojciech Gewronski. Welcome to the show, Wojciech.
Thank you, Gunnar, for the invite. Hello, everybody.
So this week, we are going to talk about well, I guess it was a feature announcement during AWS reInvent, and we're going to talk about how to do simpler, safer, and faster updates with Amazon RDS blue-green deployments. And we want this hour to be highly interactive, so if you have questions, if you have comments, just post them in the chat, and, well, we'll do our best to answer those throughout this hour. So, Wojciech, let's maybe start out by talking a bit about blue-green deployments, what those are.
Yeah, that's a good point to introduce the concept. Basically, it's a deployment strategy when you are creating two separate but identical environments when it comes to the infrastructure underlying. Why we're needing two? Because you would like to have as high availability and as low impact on your deployments as possible. Having those two identical environments, one called blue, which is the term for the old environment, the existing one that is accepting the production traffic, and then green, which will be a new version of your application, you can actually switch over between those two environments and then leverage the ability to either roll back if something goes wrong, which is pretty easy because you already have this existing environment, or to move forward with as least downtime as possible available to you. And in that regard, the blue-green deployment strategy is actually one of the most favorable ones if you have high requirements regarding the high availability. On the other end, everything has pros and cons. As you can imagine, having those two running environments at the same time, first things first, can be cumbersome and problematic because you need to replicate everything that it's set up for your blue environment in the green environment. So you are actually doubling the load, operational load, workload in that regard, that you need to configure and set up everything. But additionally, you are paying for those additional environments. And automation around that can be a little bit tricky, especially in the more complicated scenarios, which is actually moving to our today topic, because on the compute side, when we are talking about stateless servers, blue-green deployments are actually easier to orchestrate than when it comes to the stateful environments, when we are talking about databases and stuff that stores state. And in that regard, RDS helps to orchestrate and set up and lower down the operational workload related to this kind of deployment scenario and strategy.
And I think for everyone listening in right now, blue-green deployments, well, for most, are probably not a new concept. We've been using blue-green deployments for quite some time when, well, deploying software, deploying new versions of applications and so on, and basically doing the same thing. So setting up a separate but identical environment, deploying our new code to that environment, and then switching over to the environment. So it's not a new concept in itself, but the new thing about this is that it is a feature for Amazon RDS, correct?
Exactly. And also, if you think about the other services available on AWS, as you said, blue-green deployments are available in other services. For example, Elastic Beanstalk is one of the canonical examples. Another one would be support for those kind of deployment strategy in AWS Code Deploy. So, addition for last year, reInvent was actually focusing on the stateful side, about the databases, about the RDS.
And we have a question in the chat already, and keep those questions coming. This is from Sanki Raut. Does increased load on blue environment have any impact on the green environment?
That's a very good question. So if you will think about it, it will have impact because the replication is involved. So if there will be more transactions handled on the blue side, you will essentially need to replicate them on the green to the green environment if you would like to switch over at some point. On the other end, the green environment, before you will do the switch, is kind of a hidden, like with the like you would expect. So you will have access to that environment, but it will not be a production-ready workload. So it will have some impact, but on the replication side and the replication lag in that regard.
All right, good question. Keep them coming so we can learn more about blue-green deployments. I think you also had a bit of it about it in the documentation. I brought up your screen right now. So I think this is great documentation if you want to learn more about blue-green deployment, specifically for Amazon RDS in this case.
Yes, exactly. And on the screen, you see the documentation for blue-green deployments for Aurora. There's exactly the same page in the RDS documentation. And here we can actually start with talking about the support. At the moment, Amazon RDS blue-green deployments are supported in Aurora for MySQL and RDS for MySQL and MariaDB in the particular versions. So in those two documentation sites, you can actually see the explanations and the current constraints regarding this feature and functionality. And documentation is really good. It involves the whole description of the blue-green deployments, but also it explains you with the diagrams if you haven't been exposed to this concept, which is unlikely, but at the same time, it is always good to remind how those blue-green deployments work in real cases. So on the slide, on the current screen, you can see the blue environment, the state that we are starting with when we have a multi-AZ cluster with the writer and replica instances for the Aurora. And then at the later phases, we are adding more elements to the picture. We are creating a green environment, which will be identical but separate environment. We are setting up the logical replication between those two environments. And then on the desired point, we can do the switch over to green, making the green an existing production version. And after making sure that everything goes well, we can actually delete the old instance or make sure that it will be deleted when we don't need it. So this documentation side is definitely a good place to start if you would like to be exposed to the concept and you would like to understand how it works underneath. And I can definitely recommend reading this.
And I've shared both links in the chat right now, so please check them out as well. So we talked about that blue-green deployments isn't a new concept, and it isn't really a new concept for databases either. People have been doing this before, and lots of customers are doing it on AWS as well already. But how would you say that the process looked before this feature was available?
Yeah, so I even myself was involved in creating such stuff when I was a cloud architect or operations engineer. You can essentially do this without a fully managed feature, which is the blue-green deployments for RDS. But at the same time, you will need to create and orchestrate and maintain those scripts in the long term. It will also require additional knowledge about how your database agent does the replication side, how you should configure efficiently those replication in order to have the desired RTOs and RPOs, so recovery time objective, a recovery point objective criteria when it comes to the availability and this particular deployment strategy. So all of those elements adds up when it comes to the complexity from the operational standpoint. And it's definitely doable and possible if you would like to do it on your own. But at the same time, having this feature as a fully managed eases out the whole process by introducing more simpler, more predictable, which means safer, and also faster deployments with the blue-green. And we can actually go in details in a moment and show you how this works with answering your questions regarding the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah, and I've also in the past been involved in doing these operations manually, and it usually involves a lot of scripting, creating your customized script to be able to do basically these steps. And well, it usually takes a bit of effort just to start running that script the first time, see that everything works as intended. Not always in the safest of manners, maybe.
Exactly. And this is also a very fair point, but because if you will prepare those scripts, you will have to maintain them in the long term, which is essentially the biggest challenge on the old sides.
Exactly. It usually meant that you had to create a test environment to actually just test the scripts that you wanted to run to be able to know that they worked with newer versions and so on. So then to summarize it, what would you say are the core benefits of this new feature for Amazon RDS?
Definitely simplicity, because it reduces a lot of complexity of having those the whole management done manually by operations. On the other end, safety and predictability is very important as well, because you can have a very predictable recovery time objective during switchover that can be as low as 30 seconds, and you will have the whole control over that process as well, which is implemented on the vendor side, which is again easing out the complexity that is related to the operations. And the complete switchover is as fast as around a minute, depending on a few other stuff that we will talk about later, including the question you've raised from the chat, because how much load we will actually have on the blue will affect the replication, which will affect the switchover, how soon the switchover will happen. So predictability, safety, and speed, and also simplicity, those will be the biggest advantages for blue-green deployments for RDS. And having this as a fully managed feature, packaged and available to you, actually helps a lot.
All right, cool. So we are 13 minutes into the show, and that usually means that it's time to start actually seeing things in action. If you just joined us, this is the AWS Nordics Office Hours. I'm Gunnar, joined by my teammate Wojtek today, and we're looking at Amazon RDS blue-green deployments, how to basically make deployments to your databases in a safer, faster, and more simplistic way, hopefully. So we have a new question in the chat, so let's take that before we jump over to the demo. So from Heider Hengstman, how do you suggest to lead when you have a monolithic database which also have scripts to update without impacting the green environment?
So if I understand the question correctly, having the monolithic database in this case will be actually using that feature for the monolithic database could be one of the things that will be a little bit more challenging than usual, but at the same time, it will be possible. The whole problem and challenge will be related to transactional load that it's on the main database, and how big the database will be to actually create two different environments, because that will mean that you will need to replicate exactly the same environment on the green side, which may take time, which will be actually catching up a little bit slower than expected. So I would say that in the monolithic cases, it would be good to think if you can actually separate those monolithic databases first. But this is also one of the things that would be a best practice even without using the blue-green deployments. So in this particular case, having this as a fully managed feature will help with the orchestration, but this will definitely needs to be prepared and ready and planned properly, because this will take more time than usual and when it comes to in comparison to the other databases types and database workload types.
All right. So then let's start looking at blue-green deployments in action then, Wojtek.
Sure. So let me talk a little bit more about the prerequisites first. There are very little prerequisites at the moment required. One thing that it's recommended in the documentation is that you should have the specific logical replication format enabled for your databases. And in Aurora, this is especially important because this is in Aurora disabled by default. So I have already prepared the DB cluster parameter group, which is called blue-green deployments. And inside this, I have the specific parameter called binlog format, which is essentially telling me about what kind of replication format I need to have enabled for the clusters that will be configured with this parameter group. And in this particular case, you should set up either mixed or row format for the binlog replication, because that feature will require this kind of format for binary logging. Mixed and row are actually handling those cases pretty well. I set up row to show you that even with this, the whole setup will actually work flawlessly. Then another prerequisite is obviously to have an existing database. In my case, this will be a blue environment, which is a main database, a regional cluster, Aurora MySQL, deployed as a 2 instances, one as a writer instance and reader instance, which is currently available. As I said earlier, at the moment, there are supported RDS for MySQL and RDS for MariaDB, and also Aurora with MySQL compatibility. So now would be the step to actually create the green environment. So I can select a cluster, an existing cluster, and inside the actions, configure the blue-green deployment. This will actually show a wizard, and underneath it will create another logical resource that is called a blue-green deployment. Those blue-green deployments needs to have a unique database, the unique name of that deployment, because they will be unique across the AWS account and the region you are using. And this will be identifying what kind of deployments you would like to do. Then inside the configuration for that particular deployment, you can also set up the additional settings when it comes to what can be changed when you are creating the green environment. And this is one of the main advantages of having the blue-green deployments as a fully managed feature, because it allows you for changes in the configuration and also changes in the capacity, changes also in the database engine versions. So you can actually create an environment that will be an existing in one database engine version, and then green environment will be an upgrade on the major version number. This way you will have 2 different environments that will be able to synchronize, and then you will be able to upgrade with the full control over the whole process.
So actually, maybe it's worth expanding a bit on the why part of it, as we didn't talk too much about that in the intro. So you mentioned some reasons why doing these deployments, why we actually want to do them.
Yeah, so that's a very fair point. We started from talking about how to do deployments of the new version of our application with the blue-green and handling the blue-green on the database side as well. But on the other end, there are many other use cases that can be handled with the blue-green deployments. For example, you can actually do the major version upgrade and test everything before you will switch to the new version of your database. It was definitely possible with RDS previously. You could do it without any issues, but you have to orchestrate and do the whole process manually. Now, having blue-green deployments, you can actually orchestrate this process in a fully managed way, configure your new green environment with a higher version of your database engine, and then leverage this safeness and safe environment to actually connect to the green, verify that the, for example, performance, all the data was migrated properly, all the elements inside your database, like store procedures, triggers, everything works correctly. And then if you will be 100% sure that this new update on the database engine side is correct, you can actually switch to the green environment with the help of the engine. Another one could be to adjust some settings also in a safe way, because you can switch the parameter group and cluster parameter group, which are actually defining you the way how you can tweak those database engines. Another way would be to create a green environment that will have different capacity and different family for your database. So for example, you can start with T3 large, as in our example, but you can create a green environment, then scale it up and doing the reboots and making sure that the replication after reboot is doing everything correctly. Verify the performance of the new capacity, new family for your database instances, and then switch over to the green environment again. So there are multiple cases that can be handled with the blue-green deployments, not just the application deployment element.
And even scale down operations, I would say, could be a good use case for it.
Exactly. I focused on scaling up, but nothing stops you from actually going up and down with the capacity needs. Exactly. So going back to the creation of the blue-green deployment, I will create a green environment that will have the highest available MySQL version. So I will migrate from 5.7 to 8.0 with this deployment. And I will actually create and name it properly, like upgrade to MySQL 8.0. It already suggested me that you can use either recommended the newest version, or you can actually stay on the current database version engine. There is no requirement that you have to upgrade with the creating of the green environment. So you can go both ways. You can actually create new environment with the same version and change, for example, just the database schema, or you can actually migrate to the new version of the database together with the deployment. Additionally, as I said, you can actually choose the database cluster parameter group for green instances and DB parameter group for the green databases. This will actually allow you to tweak the details about the engine, about some optimizations, and so on and so on.
So in this case, if you had created a different parameter group already in your existing environment, you would be able to select that one there.
Exactly. I didn't create anything for the MySQL 8.0 because I created one for the 5.7. But if I have one, it will be available here to choose for the green database. If I will actually select the version for the 5.7, I will see the suggestion that you are selecting the same version for the blue and green environment. So it means that the DB version, NG version won't be upgraded, but it will actually tell me that I can select the database cluster parameter group that I created earlier. So going back to the upgrade for MySQL 8.0, at the bottom, you will see an estimated monthly cost for green databases, which will inform you that if you would like to preserve the green environment for the whole month, you will actually pay this amount of money for your green database as an estimation based on the current capacity that will be mirrored from your blue environment. It doesn't mean that you will be charged that number, because usually those green environments live a much shorter time, but you have an option to treat it as a regular database and regular environment and have it available to you for a longer period of time as well. So let me click the create staging environment. And this process will actually take a little bit more time because first it will create this logical research that I told you, the deployment, the blue-green deployment. And inside UI, it's already visible that we have this deployment available. But right after that, it will essentially mirror the capacity requirements that you have available in your blue environment into the green environment. So it means that it first create a regional cluster, then it will create a writer instance, then it will create a reader instance to have exactly the same environment on the green side. Then it will configure all the elements like performance insights if you have enabled them on the main cluster, logging, and so on and so on. And then it will create a replication between blue and green and synchronize everything inside the green environment. So this is currently ongoing. This will take a little bit more time. We can actually move, and I can show you what we have inside the blue database, inside the blue environment, to tell you what we would like to replicate later. So I can connect to this database as I would do it normally without any issues regarding the availability. And inside the database, I have one schema, main app DB, which has already an empty environment. I can then create additional tables that will be mirrored into that environment. So inside this simple version change script, I have creation of two tables. One will be storing the schema version and all the updates that we'll do to our schema. And then we have the most famous table in all SQL databases, which is called orders, which will store some kind of orders that we would like to have it. At the end of the script, we'll actually insert the version 1.0 of our schema into the previously created table. So I can actually deploy and apply those changes inside the this database, and that means that I will have two tables available, and inside the table with the schema version, I will have the current version of my schema. This is a starting point for us. Now we have to wait until the green environments will be ready. In the meantime, we can actually insert additional orders into the table. And those data from the tables, alongside with the tables themselves, will be replicated to the green environment afterwards. So those two elements can be loaded to the database. And to make sure that we are actually on the blue environment, I can show you that we are actually having the version of MySQL 5.7.12. So now we are waiting for the environments to set up. And this wait time will be dependent on the size of your environment and topology of your environment, the blue environment. So how much databases you will have, how many readers, replicas, how big those instances will be, and also how much load you need to have to replicate between those two environments as well, when there was a creation time involved. As Gunnar said,
would you say that it's about the same time as when creating a new cluster, plus then time for synchronizing or replicating the data?
Yeah, exactly. So you will rather, and there is a very good assumption about that. You will essentially wait as long as you created the cluster initially, the blue one, plus some replication time required to synchronize both environments. And as Gunnar said, this is and told me that this is kind of a cooking show. So we do not have to wait for the green environments to be ready. I already have something prepared in a different region. Before we will jump to another region, I can actually show you what kind of stuff we are already having available for us in terms of visibility. If you will click into the blue-green deployments in the console, you will see that currently blue environment is up and ready and has all the informations available to you in the tabs. So you have all the connectivity and security elements, including individual endpoint that allows you to connect to the blue environments directly. Please do not confuse this endpoint with the regular endpoint that you have available in your main database, because this one, the cluster endpoint, will be used later inside, for example, your application, when you are configuring your pools, the MySQL client pools in the application, this will be used to actually seamlessly change during the switchover, because this essentially the CNAME will be underneath. You will see the replacement for IP address from blue to green environments. If you would like to, however, connect directly to your green and blue environments, you will have all those details inside the blue-green deployment available to you. That also includes the networking details, information about the security in the form of the security groups, and certificates. This also has information about the replication. So as we have primary and replica, you can see the replication lag for the blue environments at the bottom as well. There are a few other interesting elements inside the interface. For example, the monitoring tab, which will have information about the basic CloudWatch metrics and more advanced one as well. But we need to wait for those for that second environment to be set up. You will have all of those informations available in this place as well, so you can actually compare. And this will be extremely helpful if you are, for example, scaling up or scaling down your instances, and you would like to compare the how the workload behaves on the new instances. Another handy tab is about logging and events. So you have all the associated CloudWatch alarms available. You have all the events that happened to your blue and green environments, and you can actually see that track of record of everything that happened inside your environment is available. And then you have all the information about the logs. Where are those logs stored? If you configure the CloudWatch integration, you will have those logs available as well in the CloudWatch logs. Another tab is about the configuration, so about what kind of engine version we have configured for both environments, what kind of option groups, and so on and so on. And obviously about the sizing, the capacity, instance classes, how much virtual CPUs, how much RAM we have associated, storage, encryption, and all the elements. This will also contain the recommendations. And then there is a last very interesting tab, which is currently very boring because we are still creating the green environment. But essentially, here you will see the status of the blue-green deployment. So you will see that DB engine version was upgraded successfully. There was a creation of the instances for the cluster done successfully. You created the read replicas properly. You can also see the switchover mapping. So what kind of blue instances maps to what kind of green instances in your environment, and what is the role of the particular instance. And this will be also helpful to make sure that it was created properly. And if you would like to connect to a particular instance, then you can actually verify that you are on the right replications path. And last but not least, you have obviously tags, but this is not used in our example. Switching quickly to the already created environment in a different region, we have exactly the same view with more details available. So for example, first, there is a blue box at the top of the section that says that we are actually upgrading our engine from blue version 5.7 to 8.0 on the green environment. And this means that you can have the individual endpoints available for your blue and green environment separately provided in the document, in the interface. At the bottom, you have information about the security group rules applied to both instances, and also about the replication. If you will go to the monitoring, this will be the more interesting one from the perspective of the comparison for the throughput. You will see that you have comparison for instances, for the whole clusters. You can actually go and verify CPU credit usage because we are using T family, which is burstable. You can actually compare if you are using global DB, you could actually compare the global DB replication lags. more sophisticated details and in metrics about the backtracking, because I configured backtracking for that cluster as well, replication and active transactions, commit throughput, and all of that is stored and available inside UI as well. And in the logs, in events, you have all the details about what happened with this particular Brooklyn deployment, and you see all the track of events, like cluster was created, upgrade is in progress, all those elements available to you as well. So now we have the environment, blue and green environments running side by side. Let's see how the replication look like in the real example. So first things first, before we will go to the replication, I would like to show you that we are actually having the one particular IP available under the cluster endpoint, which is 172.31.49.45. Pay attention to this, because if we will do switch over, this means that this IP address will change, and that will actually be handled on our end as well. So I started the command that will every single second refresh the command taking this IP address. And in the background, we can actually connect to blue and green environments to see what we have there. So for our blue environment, I'm connecting through the main database cluster and cluster endpoint. Obviously, if I will type the password properly. This is a regular thing when you are doing the live demos. At least you can be sure that it's live, not pre-recorded. And inside this database, we have the tables that I showed you earlier already applied with the schema. So if I will select the version for the schema, you will see that it's version 1.0. Let's check if we have any records inside the orders table. We do not have any. So let's actually insert some records. But before we will do that, I would like to show you that we are on the blue version of our database, which is 5.7 MySQL. And then on the other tab, I will connect to the green instance, this time directly to the instance endpoint with the green information. And keep in mind that this is also one of the things that could be interesting to you to observe throughout the whole demo, because at the moment I created the main database and this is the name I choose for my cluster. But when I created the deployment, it actually created exactly the same name with the postfix that is green and some hash at the end for the cluster, regional cluster, and the instances. And then when we will do the switch over, all those names will be updated and changed. All the details, how it looks like and what kind of changes will be applied, you can actually refer to the documentation that I mentioned earlier to have all the details about that. But essentially, you will be able to see the changes inside naming as well. Speaking about naming, let's return to the class to our instance endpoint for green, which will allow you to connect directly to the green environment. So let's do it the same way. And inside this environment, I already should have the same tables, which are present. It means that replication works. I can also check if the schema version is applied properly to the to our migrated and replicated schema, which is version 1.0 as well. And last but not least, let's check if we have any records in the orders table. So we have exactly the same state between two environments, between blue and green environments. And to make sure that we are actually talking about green environments, let's compare the version of the MySQL. So I will execute exactly the same command in the other tab, and you can see that we are on the 8.0 MySQL version in the green environment. If you would like to compare the details about the replication, you can actually use the regular commands for the MySQL, because it essentially uses the same mechanism as we configure bin log format and so on. It's actually waiting for source to send event. So our replica is waiting. So the green environment is waiting for the changes to be applied. And if we execute a very similar command on the master, we will see exactly the same information about the master in this regard. So let's see how the replication look like between those two environments. Let's insert some records into the orders table. What kind of records I will insert? I will insert basically a new orders for me and Gunnar. And I will do it with very quick command here. I am currently at the master, so on the blue environment. And after introducing this, if I will select all the records from the orders, I will see 2 of those available inside this table. Going to the green, I can actually select orders, and I already see those records available. So they are already replicated from blue to green environment. And every single time that I will insert new records, all of those will be migrated and replicated to the environment on the green side. So this is essentially the situation we would like to have before the switchover. Now we can actually perform additional checks if everything is okay with the new version of MySQL. Do we want to scale up or scale down the instance? Do we want to tweak some additional parameters and change elements inside this environment?
So just staying on the replication part just for a second. So since this is using the MySQL replication, everything, well, in the background, so everything how that works applies here as well in terms of eventual lag with replication depending on load and so on.
Exactly. If you have already built-in knowledge about how replication in MySQL looks like, if you need to troubleshoot some cases or you'd like to expand this, your knowledge will be relevant as well. So all of the knowledge you have about the RDS and how the replication works inside RDS, or in Aurora in this case, will be relevant for this use case as well.
Is this one-way replication only?
Yes. So the green environment at the moment is read-only. So we are actually having the green environment treated as a read replica. In this case, we are replicating this in one direction only. However, if we would like to migrate the schema, we can also do it. The problem is that this will break the replication chain, and this should be done as a last step before the switchover. Or you will actually need to re-enable the replication after the upgrade, the schema upgrade. If you would like to do it, there are some commands and there are some operations available on the RDS side that allows you to do this. But you keep in mind that if you would like to modify this, this will break the replication chain.
Question from Piotr Sim in the chat. How will CloudFormation behave when initial blue cluster would have been created with CloudFormation and later blue-green would be added? Will it detect it as a stack drift? And are there any tips for infrastructure as code for a blue-green?
That's a very good question. So starting from the end, at the moment, CloudFormation is not supported for the blue-green deployment. So you cannot create the blue-green deployment resource from the CloudFormation and bind existing clusters via CloudFormation. That being said, if you have a blue environment already, and you will apply the blue-green deployment, you will return to exactly the same name of the cluster. However, the resource ID will change underneath. And my assumption will be that there will be a drift in the CloudFormation stack, but I haven't checked that. This is my hypothesis. Knowing how it works underneath, I will assume that this will detect this CloudFormation stack drift.
Yeah. So going from MySQL 5.7 to 8 would be a stack drift, for instance, or changing the instance types or sizes.
Yes, in this case, yes.
Cool. All right.
So we have the environment blue that it's replicating to the green environment. We created the blue-green environment, and it's waiting for a switchover at the moment. So let's plan for a switchover, and let's look how the switchover looks like. But everything that I shown you was done through the console. I said that CloudFormation is not supported at the moment, but at the same time, it would be impractical to have your CI/CD pipeline, for example, with automated continuous deployment and continuous delivery pipelines, to use the console. Luckily, there is a support for AWS CLI, so you can actually use the CLI feature.
We're
And
back.
yeah, sorry for that. Hopefully just the video. So speaking about the blue-green deployments and CLI, you can actually create those blue-green deployments through the CLI without any issues. Here is the example how you can do it. And you are actually creating and doing the same thing that was available in the console. So we are setting up the target version, you are setting up target DB cluster group, parameter groups, source of that replication, and the name. The same goes with the switchover. So you can actually schedule a switchover with the AWS CLI, and this will actually allow you to do it in a programmatic way, for example, in the CI/CD pipeline. So you can configure here what kind of blue-green deployment based on the name we would like to switch over, and you can actually set up the switchover timeout, which is the time limit for the whole switchover. If that will not be, if the new environment will not be ready before that timeout, it will essentially roll back to your previous state and leave your blue environment as it was before. So speaking about the switchover, now we can actually do the switchover to the green environment and schedule it properly from the console. Let's move to the Cloud9. I would like to do one additional thing to show you that we did the switchover properly later on, which is the migration of the schema. So I will essentially create a new column in my table orders and upgrade the schema version inside the table. So I will execute this SQL script. Keep in mind that this will break the replication, so it means that we will actually not see any new records coming. I will not fix it in the background because that would require using some additional RDS commands to skip the replication errors and so on and so on. But you can do it. This would be one of the steps that you have in your CI/CD pipeline when you are, for example, migrating the database versions and schema versions. So let me execute this bit and verify that everything is available to me. So this way, inside the orders table, I should have a new column, which is a shipping address. Just make sure that we are at the proper version of our database. And now we can actually schedule the switch over from the console. So let's move to the blue-green deployment. And after selecting this particular resource, we can actually go with the actions and select a switchover here. Now we will see the switchover summary. It shows us from what kind of blue environment we have, what kind of green environment we are aiming for, what are the differences, which is an engine version in this case. And you can actually configure additional settings for the replicas. You can see the differences between those two environments in the replicas as well. And then you can set up this timeout setting. And this is one of the key parts if you are, which you can configure. The timeout range is from 30 seconds to 1 hour. And if the switchover will take longer than this, it means that there will be no change to your environments and everything will go flawlessly to the starting point. Let's configure 1 minute for that particular switchover. It should be more than enough for this use case. And right before we will click switchover, let's look once again into the IP address that we have here, 4945 as the ending. So let's schedule the switchover. And now we are actually moving the green environment in the front of the blue environment. This will require renaming of the resources, as I mentioned. So you will see in a moment a few resources with the old postfix available in the console. Blue-green deployment will be a separate resource which will be disconnected from the blue and green environments. And in that minute, you will also see that you cannot modify those clusters. So it means that when you created a blue and green environments and you scheduled a switchover, this will not allow you to do any further changes to both environments, because essentially they're at the moment moving from one place to another. So this is one of the things that it's worth remembering, that all the changes should be applied before the switchover you would like to schedule.
Right.
What is actually happening in the background is that RDS as a service runs a lot of guardrail checks, and it verifies that the blue environment and green are ready for switchover. Then it stops the new write operations on the DB clusters for both environments. It drops the connections to the DB instances in both environments and doesn't allow for new connections. It waits for the replication to catch up in the green environment, so that green will be in sync with the blue environment if there will be any pending transactions. And this is the key point that is dependent how much load you have on your database, because this will essentially determine how fast the switchover will be. If there is a huge load on the blue instance and there will be a backlog in synchronization, this will actually require us some time to catch up. After the synchronization, it renames the DB cluster and DB instances in both environments. And as I said, for the green, it actually renames it to new name, to the old name that was associated with blue. And for the blue environment, it adds the old postfix, which is already visible on the screen. So you can see that the blue is already marked as the old. It also renames the endpoints in the green environments to match the corresponding endpoints in the blue environment, so the application changes wouldn't be required. It re-enables the connections to databases for both environments, re-enables the write operations to both DB clusters, and after the switchover, the previous production DB cluster is read-only. So the old cluster, essentially the old blue cluster, is read-only, but it can be, if you will reboot the writer instance, you can actually return to the regular writing capabilities as well. And then you are able to verify if everything works perfectly with your application. And after that, you will be able to either roll back or move forward with the new version. On the screen, you see that the successfully switchover happened from blue to green, and you actually see what happened that I explained by words. Main database currently is the Aurora MySQL that is inside the version. Actually, I don't have the engine version here, but I can enable it. So if I will go and see the engine version, where it lost. So if I will go with the engine version, okay, so I need to refresh the page. That's probably the...
I think you have to confirm it at the bottom of that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you're right, actually. Continue. Yeah. That's a correct one. Thank you. So if I will go now and I can compare, the main database is currently having the engine versions 8.0, which is the green environment that we created. Old database has the 5.7, which was the blue environment before. It has already the old postfix that I mentioned. And then there is a blue-green deployment that has the upgrade to MySQL 8.0, which is not having any associated resources. We have the status switchover complete. All the databases and instances are available. So let's verify that everything happened without any issues. If you remember, we had the different IP address here. Now we have 4958, which is essentially the green environment. And then we can actually see if the current version of the green, which was here, is reflecting the changes. So let's go with the version of the database. I lost my connection because, as I said and explained to you, it actually tore down all the connections that were existing. But if I will reconnect to the exactly the same cluster endpoint that is available here, it means that I will be able to see the green version of our environment. So once again, let's check the version 8.0, and let's check the orders table. We have the new version of our schema. Let's verify the new version with the schema version table. Yep, we have the version 2.0 applied on almost at the end of the hour.
Very cool.
So switchover complete, and now the last step would be to clean up the environment. So I can actually terminate the old instances here, remove the cluster if I don't need it, and then I will stop paying for that resources,
right?
Which essentially means that I will not pay the full price for the whole month that was shown at the beginning.
Very cool. Right, we are quickly approaching the top of the hour. We have a couple of questions, and it was good to have you back on camera again towards the end, Wojtek. We lost you there for a bit. So the first question was if it's possible to use RDS proxy to help keep that connection up, or...
That's a good question. At the moment, RDS proxy is not supported by blue-green deployments. So no, that's the short answer.
And then the second question from Piotr Sim again, is there some risk of missing data with write-heavy workloads? Or does this switchover guarantee 100% data consistency?
No, so there is no risk of losing data because, as I said, the whole process actually stops accepting the new connections. First, stop accepting the writes, then stop accepting the connections. All of that changes that were successfully acknowledged by the blue will be replicated to green environment and then will be available in the green environment. Now, the question is what the application side will do when it will face the connection dropped. But essentially, all the good citizens and all the right applications should retry or should actually resume in a while when the deployment happens. So essentially, there is no risk of losing the acknowledged transactions and the acknowledged rights on the blue.
All right. So with that, it's time to wrap up. And any last words? 30 seconds, Wojtek?
No, I hope if you would like to see any additional database engines or new versions supported, reach out to your account managers and technical account managers. They will be happily accept your feedback. The same goes with additional use cases for the blue-green deployments that are currently not supported. And I encourage you to read the documentation because you have all the information about the constraints available there.
All right. So with that, this has been another episode of AWS Nordics Office Hours. Thank you, Wojtek, for joining today, and thanks everyone watching as well. I've definitely learned a lot of new things today, so that is always the goal with this show. All right, and thanks everyone, and I hope to see you again next Monday. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.